So thank you everybody for having me today, and I wanted to talk to you about kind of where we are in the context of some of the Clean Water Act requirements that we're all working on together for the Chesapeake Bay restoration. I've spoken at this forum in the past in a more curmudgeonly manner about some of the costs relative to the benefits of the Chesapeake Bay restoration. And that's largely, I think, because I'm trying to make sure that as we move forward, we're doing things in the most cost-effective way. But one of the things that happens, I think, sometimes when you do that is that people think that you're not actually doing things. So I wanted to talk about what we're actually doing as well. All of you have heard about the stormwater utility fee, HB 987, rain tax, whatever you want to call it. That passed in 2012, and we were required to put together a fee as of July of last year. And we did. The Board of County Commissioners of Frederick County, Maryland decided that they were going to charge a penny for that fee. But one of the things that I think got lost in the shuffle is that Frederick County government actually funds its compliance programs through general funds from taxes. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. The Department of the Environment did send Frederick County a letter expressing disappointment over their choice and reminding them that if that was all they were funding their program with, then it would not be adequate to comply with their Clean Water Act requirements or their municipal separate storm sewer system permits. But that is about all that they could do because the county was technically in compliance. As opposed to Carroll County, which Phil, I'm sure, can tell you more about it, but Carroll County actually got a letter from the Assistant Attorney General threatening fines. So MDE actually negotiated with Carroll on a contribution as a part of their property tax. But as a result of doing that, there was still some concern about third-party lawsuit potential. And so in this most recent legislative session, two of our state senators, one from Carroll and a portion of Baltimore and one from Frederick County, said, well, hey, you know, we couldn't get anything passed in the legislation that would eliminate Frederick County and Carroll County from having to do this fee. Let's just put it into the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act as an amendment to the state budget. So that is what they were able to do, and so they essentially put in an amendment called a BRFA amendment to the budget that says that MDE has the discretion, Maryland Department of the Environment, to negotiate with Frederick and/or Carroll counties to enter into a memorandum of understanding that would specify the amount to be paid into the programs as a substitute for having to pay HB 987. Now, I'm telling you guys all this because I think you might be interested because it's been in the papers, but the reality is that I think in the case of Carroll County, it might end up being something beneficial to you because it would protect you. But in the case of Frederick County, we're not planning to use it at this point in time because it essentially requires the jurisdiction to expend a specific amount of money at the discretion of MDE, where all the other jurisdictions are held to a compliance standard. And so one of the areas I think that we need to be very careful about is making sure that we're held to compliance standards and not financial standards. But if anyone does want to take advantage of that, it has to happen by December 1st. The large municipal separate storm sewer system permit holders, of which there are none in this room, they got their new permits at the beginning of the year, either the very end of last year or the beginning of this year. The mediums are just now starting to get their permits, so Howard County has a tentative determination that's about to go out on the street. Now, why does anybody care about a municipal separate storm sewer system permit? It's because that is what has the main requirements for bay restoration within it. Although there are goals in the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, those are largely aspirational because they're not regulatory until you come to permit implementation. And so whatever you get in your permits as a phase 1 or a phase 2 entity is what you're going to have to live with. And there are a number of phase 2 permit holders in this room and 2 phase 1s. So just so you know, Phil, Howard County just got its permit. They're estimating, I'll talk about that in the next slide. So the new permit has, the biggest requirement that it has in it is that you have to treat 20% of your jurisdiction's untreated urban impervious area, which MDE defines to be basically any urban area, first of all, that's not owned by someone else's permit. So that could include private areas, and it will include private areas. And then the retrofit requirement They are looking at any area that either doesn't have existing stormwater management infrastructure or areas that were built 2002 and before that don't meet the current stormwater management requirements. So you may have areas in your landscape that already have stormwater infrastructure that MDE is considering to be untreated. And I'm going to talk about what I really think you all ought to be doing at this point in time, because your phase 2 permits are slated to include that requirement. They also require you to develop TMDL implementation schedules. And the permits that came out for large jurisdictions included requirements for litter and floatables that may be a little different for the smaller permits. One of the things that we've been working a lot on at the state, the Maryland Municipal Stormwater Association, which I'm on the board of that, is to understand where these permits and practicability actually meet each other. And I think this is of direct relevance to all of your communities. The issue that we have is that the permits are being developed without consideration for practicability at this time, and that can include things like your ability to generate funds. You can factor in affordability for those of you that are in some of the more rural counties. There are standards at EPA for affordability. It has to do with the amount of money that your jurisdiction can borrow, the amount of money that your citizens can borrow, and a number of other factors that you could look at. EPA is evolving on this issue. We have a work group, but there is some interim guidance. Also, your ability to manage, the capacity of your organization to manage all of these projects, and some understanding of what it takes to get from point A to point Z as far as increasing your organizational capacity. So one of the things that happened this year is that the State Department of Legislative Services put out a report where they looked at all of the jurisdictions that have these restoration requirements, the larger ones, and how well they're doing with their funding. And basically DLS determined that none of the jurisdictions are generating enough funds to meet these new permit goals, which should be a concern to everybody and should really speak to the need for the use of any of a number of different mechanisms, one being the maximum extent practicable standard that's in the Clean Water Act for these MS4 permits. And just to give you an example, and I don't think I'm calling out Howard County unfairly, they've given some presentations across the state with some public information. They were able to get a stormwater utility fee this year that generates $10 million a year. However, their expected liability under their next permit is $33 million a year. So they have a $23 million a year gap. And so they're struggling internally with the idea of having a permit that they know at this point in time that they can't physically meet, and not wanting to be a bad actor and wanting to do as much as they possibly can. And so the question that they're asking themselves right now is, what is the consequence of accepting the permit that they have that's about to go to tentative determination as is? And there's different people in the government who are thinking different things. I'm not going to call any of them out by name, but some of them are saying we should accept it and we should do the best we can, and Maryland will understand as long as we're not the one at the end of the track, which might be, one of our counties still, then nobody's going to come after us. Well, those of us that have been through EPA audits know that that's really not the case, and that you can get fined for doing things even if you're doing the best you can if you're not meeting the explicit regulatory requirement. And then the other folks at Howard County are saying, is there anything that we can do to try to get this permit changed so that it's actually possible to meet? And then there's also questions of, do we need to raise the stormwater utility fee? But right now it's around $100 per citizen, so we're talking about essentially tripling that. So the real question is where the application of maximum extent practicable would come into play. It's kind of vague in the Clean Water Act. It basically says that the permitted entity has the ability to tell the regulated entity what they think it is, and that the regulated entity has to consider it. There's a list of types of things that they have to consider, although the Code of Federal Regulations and the Clean Water Act say that it's intentionally left vague to give flexibility to the permittee. We have put together a draft one for MDE on our permit, and we're in the process of doing some financial analysis to go along with it. And it really is going to be interesting to see how these permits play out, because they are stretched financially for many of our jurisdictions. So just to give you guys some picture of where we are with Frederick County, this $488 is approximately what we think we're generating per year through our stormwater utility fee. I got in trouble for saying that somebody told me not to spend it all in one place, so I'm not going to do that. This is the amount that we generated per year over a 10-year period for our MS4 permit, $2.5 million a year. So this is what we were spending on average. This current fiscal year, we increased it to $3.56 million, so we basically buy $1 million. And our proposed budget for 15 for the MS4 permit is $5.35 million. So we're already ramping up in order to meet some of these new requirements. And we're more than twice what we were spending in the past. This is what we estimate the permit's going to cost us per year, $22.4 million. And so there's a big gap here at this point in time, and that's where our practicability stuff is going to come in. This is what we estimate the Chesapeake Bay restoration to cost per year if we were to have met the reduction goals for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment that are assigned to the local government in the Chesapeake Bay TMDL area plans. So there's also a big difference, interestingly enough, between what the permits are going to require us to do and what the Chesapeake Bay really needs us to do. And what this all really says to me is that we need to get more cost-effective on the kinds of practices that we're doing.
Shannon, that's a perfect segue to something that you noted earlier about what is the cost of accepting a permit as it is. The idea that you need to be more cost-effective. It's very, very difficult to do that when so many of these things are new technology, and they're pioneering new technology in order to meet these requirements. And some of the requirements of the new permit are going to be that there are certain pollutants which haven't been seen before as pollutants in our permit that are going to require treatment, yet there are no known protocols for treating those.
That's a good point, and hold that thought because we can talk about that at the end of the presentations, but there are some pollutants like toxics and non-tidal bacteria for which there aren't really good BMPs yet, and we don't know what the costs are. So I'm not sure at this point in time when the smaller permits are going to be released. MDE has not told us yet. There is speculation that it won't happen until next year, but I don't know if that's true or not, and I wouldn't count on it. Like I said, it's like your permits, everything that I've heard from MDE will contain a 20% retrofitting requirement on them. So my advice to you at this point is to prepare and to do front loading of some effort. One, so that you can start to develop your capacity to start to meet some of these requirements, but two, so that you can scope out what those requirements are and you can speak more intelligently to MDE when you get to the point where you're going to have to be negotiating a permit. Tomorrow I'm not supposed to take comments yet, but what do you want to say?
Well, I just actually I wanted to clarify, like, who actually gets the permit? Like, how big of a jurisdiction gets it? Like, what are they doing or not doing, or size or not size?
Yeah.
Who gets permits?
So it's all in the Clean Water Act. If you're a jurisdiction that has over 100,000 people, you get a phase 1 permit, and you're either a medium or a large. If you have, I think, over 2,000 but less than 100,000, kind of generally, and I might be a little bit wrong on that bottom number, you get a phase 2. And the permit holder is the municipality. So it's a national pollutant discharge elimination system, municipal separate storm sewer system permit, and it's essentially for discharges into the storm sewer in a municipal area.
Well, but in a state like Maryland, which has a lot of unincorporated areas, the county then have the permit?
The unincorporated area, if it's in a municipality, does not have a permit, it's just not covered.
Okay.
So if you have a small municipality that doesn't have a permit, that's an unregulated area, essentially. And so the MS4 area, I would map it. MDE has put out standards of what they think the MS4 area is. I would look at that. They do differ from the Clean Water Act. I would evaluate your areas of impervious surface. The most authoritative way to do that is to use what's called planimetrics, which are the building footprint outlines from your orthophotography flyover. The state does a lot of that kind of work. You can buy into state contracts if you haven't already. To evaluate your untreated impervious acres, the state has standards for that, and they're in the state's accounting for stormwater document. And I put the link here so that you could look it up later. Look at how many BMPs you're going to have to put in order to treat that amount of area and figure out how much those are going to cost. And to be able to converse intelligently with the Department of the Environment when it's time for you to negotiate your permit so that you will know when they say you have to treat 20% of your untreated urban impervious area, what that actually means. Because if you don't know what it means, then you won't be able to say what's practical to them. And so some of that could include cost, effort, physical possibility, geographical restrictions, and there's some guidance in the Clean Water Act, but then you can also add in some additional things. And so on the more positive end of things, where are you going to be putting practices and what kind of practices should you be looking to do? I'm going to talk about some of the ones that we focused our energies on, where we think that they're the most cost effective. And so the biggest one that we have been trying to promote is tree plantings. We can do an acre of tree plantings with all the maintenance for about, at most, $5,000 a year. Sorry, $5,000 total. And so MDE has some weird accounting guidance for that as far as how much impervious area you get credit for, but it's still really good compared to a lot of other practices. And so one of the things we've done is we've set some goals locally with the properties that we own through the school system and through our parks. You can also do a jurisdiction-wide one. The city of Frederick did that, where you look to see where you have existing tree canopy coverage and where you can put new tree canopy in so that you can start to actually look for projects. One piece of advice I have to you in doing this is that your state forest service is very, very helpful in putting together those plans and putting together planting plans for individual properties. Another area is streamside forest buffers. So you can plant trees upland or you can plant them next to the streams. You can also analyze your streams and see where you don't have buffers, and you can work with your various communities to try to get them implemented. And there's a number of programs out there for tree planting. The governor has the Stream Restoration Challenge. You have other funding mechanisms that are out there. Another thing that we do in Frederick County is we organize our local partners, and so we've got state, federal agencies, some local groups, not as much as we used to back when we had a strong economy, citizens, and people that are really interested in water quality and habitat. We organize this, it's non-advocacy, and so it's really focused on outreach, education, restoration. But that allows us to leverage our restoration money at the county so that we ourselves are not spending all these dollars ourselves. We're bringing in partners, we're facilitating connections between them, and we're getting more work done than we would be able to do ourselves. Look for lower cost practices again. If you can use your citizens to help you to implement these practices, you can save money, although I will note that the household scale practices are not as cost effective as the ones that you can do at a larger scale. However, you're going to have citizens that are really interested in doing things, and it's also a great outreach and education tool. So we are in the process of tying our Green Homes Challenge, which certifies households in a number of different practices, power saving, alternative energy installation, green home practices. We're trying to funnel those kinds of certifications and challenges into some of the more regulatory types of programs, like the Green Leader Challenge includes doing some household scale stormwater management retrofits so you can take credit for rain barrels and report. So we've developed a reporting mechanism in here that will eventually allow us to help people to get a stormwater utility fee credit, to take credit under the MS4 program, and take credit under the BAID program. So it looks like a nice, friendly interface, but it has a lot of brains behind it that are calculating various things for our purposes, and so it's a dual tool for us. And one of the things that my Green Homes Challenge coordinator staff wanted me to make everyone aware of is that since this is a local government product, if you wanted to take the source code for this and tailor it for your own jurisdiction, we are happy to share it. Also, tally up your existing efforts. You know, you're already doing things. I think the BAID program wants to see things that were done after, I think, 2007. But you're probably doing a lot of things in your jurisdiction already that can count towards this, and you should take credit for it. Another cheaper type of restoration technique is outfall retrofits. A lot of times you have these old channels. I stole this off of Anne Arundel's website. These aren't mine, but I like the pictures. Channels with concrete in them. Nobody's doing that anymore. Rip the concrete out, you get an impervious area reduction, and then you could get an outfall retrofit or stream restoration credit for recreating a channel here. Same thing here, you could turn this into any of a number of things, a bioswale, you know, something that traps, slows down the water, and you already have existing infrastructure here, so you're not having to build something new, you're taking advantage of something that's already there. Kind of on the line of taking advantage of stuff that's already there, if you're doing retrofits of your old ponds, a lot of them were built prior to 2002, they're there just to hold water for a little bit and then spew it back out again. You can add a little bit of stuff to them that helps them to filter the stormwater, and then you're not having to build a new facility, you're just adding some additional resources to that facility so that you can get credit for it. Same thing with wet areas. You have these depressions in the landscape, they're wet. Why not add plants or do a little excavation, change the soil out, and suddenly you have a wetland or you have a conservation landscaping area or a bioswale, something that you can actually take credit for as a stormwater practice. The State Highway Administration is doing a lot of work in our areas on their roadside retrofits. Take a page from them. They have a whole program that they've created to do cost-effective retrofits on the sides of roads. And they've developed some of their own practices. One of the things that they do, for example, is instead of putting in some of these more expensive native plants to do all of their plantings, they'll put in switchgrass, which is a native plant. It has a deep root system, but it also kills other plants because it's allelopathic, so you don't have to weed it. You can just mow it a couple times a year. So there's some things that you can learn from some of the big boys out there, and that's one of them. And then stream restoration, the reason why a lot of jurisdictions focus on that, although it is a more complicated practice, is because you can get a lot of credit for it from within your drainage area, and it ends up being one of the most cost-effective practices at the end of the day, although your costs to actually do the practice can be very high, and it has a lot of permitting requirements. So those are just some things that I wanted to share with you as far as getting ready on your next permits, and I know that this is a lot for all of you, but it is my best advice at this